tutorial, I can still answer the questions from the students. Okay, so finally, we're gonna have the revision tutorials for to have the reflection on the knowledge we learn from the whole from the whole semester. We can notice the module structure, the strategic corporate social responsibilities. We have 6 different parts, and in each part we have 2 chapters. So the main task for this module is to discuss what is CSR, but we talk about CSR from different perspectives. So here is the big picture of the module. I show this big picture every time at the beginning of the tutorial. And we can notice the core of this module. We talk about the interactions between the corporations or firms and societies. And for societies, as a society, we should notice that it is composed of different stakeholders. So after the first part, we introduce the definition of CSR and the drivers of CSR, the general information. We go to the detailed introduction about who are stakeholders and what is the interactions between stakeholders and the firm. So in part 2, we should know that the firms are connected with the society. We should analyze the firm issue from a holistic perspective or from the stakeholder perspectives. So in chapter 3, we mainly talk about stakeholder theory. Who are the stakeholders? How to identify the most important stakeholders and why stakeholders are important to the firm, and why firms should take responsibility to stakeholders. That is what chapter 3 introduces. For chapter 4, okay, we know that for firms, they should take responsibility to the society or to the stakeholders in the society. For the society and stakeholders, they should also frame a healthy business environment and take responsibilities to the firm. Okay, so they have the interaction between each other. So that this is stakeholder perspective. When we introduce next part, legal perspective, we mainly talk about one of particular stakeholders introduced in part 2, that is shareholder. So in company law, it recorded the responsibilities and the rights of the firm, how firms should protect the shareholders' wealth, the shareholders' interests, and how firms should be monitored by, for example, internal corporate governance mechanism and external corporate governance mechanism. So that is a link between these 2 parts. In legal perspective, they just talk about why shareholders should be the most important stakeholders, because compared with other type of stakeholders, shareholders are the person who actually invest money in the company. So from the legal perspective, the shareholders should be the primary stakeholders for the firm, and the firm should first of all protect the rights and the wealth of the shareholder. Okay, this is a link between these 2 parts. And for part 4, from behavior perspective, when we talk about CSR, we know that in legal perspective, firms and corporations, they are also called as a legal person, right? So they are just like a person, the individual living in this world. They have a different type of behavior. They conduct different type of behavior. And CSR just one of specific behavior of the firm. That is a value creating behavior. So in this part, chapter 7 talks about how firms create value to society. And chapter 8 introduce why firms should create value to the society. Okay, we try to understand CSR as a value creating behavior of the firm. And when we learn part 2, we know that the corporations and stakeholders, they interact with each other, right? Okay, so because the firm, they can do CSR to create a value to the society. So in the meantime, the society building good relationship with different stakeholders can also provide benefits to the firm. So from a strategic perspective, we can treat this value creating behavior as one of the strategy of the firm to help the firm to gain the competitive advantage compared with the industry peers. So to maintain the sustainable profits of the firm. Since we talk about the sustainable of the profits of the firm, in the meantime, the firm should also take responsibility to take care of the sustainability issue of the society. Okay, so that is the big picture of CSR in the whole semester. We noticed that we introduced CSR from different perspectives. There are 6 different perspectives, but there are still a lot of links between each of the perspective. So is it clear so far? So just press 1 to let me know if it is clear to you. Okay, good. How about other students? Okay, good. Okay, so based on this picture, we introduced at least 6 cases during the tutorial to help our students to have a better understanding of the knowledge from each chapter. So for chapter 2, when we discuss the drivers of the CSR, we introduce another drivers of the CSR, that is religion. We talk about how religion influence how firm conduct business practice. So we ask 3 questions for students. Why is Islamic finance necessary? How does Islamic finance work? And do you agree that Islamic financial products are sharing compliant? I talk about these 3 questions. When we introduce this case is from our textbook. Actually, we talk about the business practice revised by religion. Because in Islamic world, we know that the people in Islamic world, they have very strong belief. And in their belief, they do not think that the people should make money by using money, okay? So for the bank system, how bank make profits? They lend the money to the customers and get the profit feedback from the customers with interest, right? However, this business practice, it is not acceptable in the Islamic world because of their unique religion. They don't think that is the right thing to do. So how bank work in Islamic world? So we can notice that for Islamic bank, they create a new business practice. For example, if their customers want money to buy a house, instead of directly lending money to the customers, the bank just buy the house to the customers and just get the rent every month from the customers to get the profit feedbacks. Okay, so we can notice that, yes, the core debate in this case that whether interest equals rent in Islamic world. So that is our core debating in this case. The general conclusion here is that the firm have the choices to create a new business practice for the customers to meet the specific requirement from the customers because of a different social norm. Okay. We can also notice that the social norm influence business practice. So that is the basic conclusion for this case. And in chapter 3, we move to the perspective of stakeholders. Okay, so now we introduce stakeholder theory and discuss the case of Starbucks by asking these 3 questions. Okay, I noticed some students is typing here. So if you have a question, just leave the question here. I will reply later on. In this case, I believe most students are quite familiar with this case because I assigned this case as a homework to all the students, and we provide the feedback to the answers of answers from our students. So here is just my feedback to the answers. The first of all, I just provide advice how to frame the answers for case analysis question, not a case description. Okay, how to go further and deeper when you think about the case analysis questions, not the case description. So first of all, you need to incorporate knowledge you learn from the lecture. That is the top one criteria. So in this chapter, back to the chapter 3, we talk about stakeholder theory, right? So any students can tell me, how do you understand stakeholder theory? Because we also ask you to use stakeholder theory to analyze the first task in our final coursework. Okay, so any students can share your opinion on how do you understand stakeholder theory. Okay. I'm waiting for the answers. No answers? If no answers, I just skip to this part. Okay, so I won't wait. Since no students reply here, I will just say that when you answer the case analysis questions, first of all, provide your understanding of the theory we mentioned in the task. Okay, provide your understanding. How do you understand stakeholder theory and how to use stakeholder theory to try to find the most important stakeholders of IPSS? Okay, that is the way how to answer the question. For the second tips I provided for Starbucks case, that is link the business practice with case information and think about questions beyond the case. Because I just assigned the questions, discussion questions at the earlier stage of the tutorial. However, by the end of the tutorial, by the end of this semester, we have the higher requirement from our students. So now in the final coursework, it is your task to search for the information in final coursework. Okay, so it is your job to search more information from anywhere to support your arguments. You cannot just depend on the information we provide in the coursework. We just provide a scenario. However, you need to search on your own for the detailed information for IBSS or for other e-commerce companies. Okay, that is what I want to emphasize. The last thing I want to emphasize that we can notice that for several questions, it's quite similar with the discussion questions from our tutorial. They are similar, however, they are still different questions. In other words, we are testing different abilities from the students. So you can refer to the logic of how we frame the answers, how we answer questions, but do not use our feedback as an answer template for your final coursework. Okay? So that is what I want to emphasize here. For chapter 4, we still talk about stakeholder perspective. However, we talk about responsibilities not for the firms, but also for other stakeholders to the firm. We introduce a very interesting video that is Supersize Me, and we discuss what is the responsibility, who should be blamed for the obesity issue in the U.S. society. should McDonald's take responsibility, or customers, or other stakeholders? And the general conclusion for this tutorial, the first one is, it doesn't mean that the sale or consumption of fast food is necessarily wrong, but rather that fast food is overconsumed. So it means that for McDonald's, they should take some responsibility because they oversell the unhealthy food to the customers. However, for customers, they still have the rights. They have the discretion to deny the sales from the McDonald's, from the restaurant. So the for the stakeholders, they should also take a responsibility for this obesity issue. And of course, for other stakeholders, especially for the government, the school, the social media, they also should participate in solving these social issues. So overall, we can notice that a lot of actors involved in this society. If there is the issue emerging in the society, all types of stakeholders, all type of actors should take responsibility. We cannot just let the firm to take all responsibility for the whole society. That is not fair. All the stakeholders should be responsible for the society issue. Okay. Chapter 4. Okay, from chapter 5, we start to discuss CSR issue from the legal perspective. In chapter 5, we talk about corporate rights and responsibility. And we also introduce a documentary video that is the corporations. So in this video, we encourage students to think about why corporations are called as bad apples. After watching this documentary, first of all, we should realize that why firms, especially for big companies, are called as bad apples, because they are so powerful. They are very powerful to influence our lives. So for the corporations, they should have the responsibility. They should have the awareness to influence our life in a positive way, but not a self-serving way or negatively way. Okay, and the bottom line responsibility of the firm, at least recorded in company law, is not to make the profit, but to protect the interest of the shareholder. So this is the conclusion for chapter 5. Okay, so we got the one answer from Changhe, stakeholder theory, a new theory of what companies should do. Company helping pursue the interest of their own. This theory disperses the benefits created by enterprise. Okay, I would say yes, that is the general spirit of stakeholder theory. However, stakeholder theory we introduced in chapter 3 is very detailed. We introduce a lot of content, a lot of knowledge, a lot of perspectives about stakeholder theory in chapter 3. For example, how do you define stakeholders? Why stakeholders are important? Who are the most important stakeholders? They are all perspectives that is relevant to stakeholder theory. So when you use this theory to answer questions, you should identify which perspectives you want to focus on. Okay. Okay. Now let's move to chapter 6, who own the firm. Okay, different from chapter 5, we talk about the rights and the responsibilities of the firm, of the corporation. Now in this chapter, we talk about the rights and the responsibilities of the people, the key people, the most important people within the firm. So first of all, any student can tell me, how do you understand the key people of the firm? Who are the key people within the firm? CEO, very good. Directors and managers, very good. Okay, notice many students are typing here. Shareholders, excellent. Okay, so overall, yes, the key people we mentioned here are the people who have the right to make decisions. the strategies for the firm. They are included CEOs, boards of directors, top management teams, and shareholders. These are the people who have the rights to make a decision for the firm. Okay. And in this chapter, we also introduce what is corporate governance. When we talk about corporate governance, we mainly talk about how boards of directors, as a representative of shareholders, to monitor the decisions made by CEO and its top management team. And by analyzing the corporate governance failure case of Luckin Coffee, okay, the financial fraud case, we conclude that corporate governance is important to protect not only firm itself but also internal and external stakeholders, and the board independence. That means that the certain number appoints as a certain number of directors outside the firm is the core of corporate governance. And shareholders, especially for external ones, should also take responsibility to monitor firm behavior to protect at least the shareholders' interests. And the different external stakeholders take different roles in monitoring. Okay, so that is the conclusion for chapter 6. Chapter 7. From chapter 7, we start discuss CSR issue from the behavioral perspective, how to understand CSR as a value creating behavior. So before we have the better understanding of the value creating behavior, we should have the appropriate understanding of value or profits. When we discuss the Pinduoduo case, we propose 2 questions for the students. The first one is it okay for the for-profit company to profit from the poverty? And whether Pinduoduo can change their targeted customers to the top-tier cities customers in the future. By discussing this case, we hope the students understand that for the definition of profits or value is quite broad. When we talk about the profits or value, we not only talk about how much money or how much profit made by the firm, we also talk about what is the social value to other stakeholders in the society. So first of all, you should understand the profits. The definition of the profits or value of the firm is very broad. It's not just about money. And also we talk about the difference between profit maximization and the profit optimization. What are the difference between these 2 terms? We do the comparison during the tutorial. What I want to emphasize here is for profit maximization, it's talk about the short-term orientation, and it talks about how firm itself make the most of the money. However, for profit optimization, it talks about a long-term orientation, and it talks about what is the best for the whole society rather than the firms themselves. Okay, so that is the difference between these 2 terms. Chapter 8, we continue discussing why firms should create value to the society, and we introduce the research article CSR reporting. Okay, at least from my tutorial groups, because most of students did not read the whole article, so I only let students to discuss the second question, why firm to report CSR activity? What kind of a benefit a firm can get if they disclose what they have done for CSR? Okay, and you can find some answers from each tutorial group on the module page. The general conclusion for this tutorial, first of all, we can say that the CSR reporting behavior is a compliance behavior to deal with expectations or requirements from external stakeholders. It means that for the firm, sometimes they do the CSR activities not only because they just want to do that. sometimes it is because that external stakeholders ask them to do so. So they have to do so, okay? That is a compliance behavior to meet a social expectation. And the second conclusion here, firms still have discretion to choose how to disclose and how to balance conflicting expectations from different stakeholders. Okay, so for firms, they have different options to solve the conflicting expectations from the stakeholder. So you can also link to the conclusion we get from second tutorial about Islamic Bank. We can notice that for firms, they can have different options. They can have different strategies to build good relationship with stakeholders. And building good relationships, that is a capability for the firms to achieve competitive advantage in the industry. So that is related to strategic perspective. So in chapter 9 and 10, when we talk about strategic perspective of the CSR, we have the retreat discussion on Pinduoduo case by asking the exactly same question we assigned for the Starbucks case. Okay, we rediscuss these three questions, but put more emphasis on the last question. The general conclusion for these two tutorials is that CSR is one of way for firm to achieve competitive advantage. Okay. However, whether CSR can help firm to achieve competitive advantage depends on external and internal environment. So it needs the students to do analysis on external and internal environment of the firm and try to analyze whether CSR is strategic relevance. Okay. So here is a summary of the tutorial during the whole semester. So we can notice that we just learn what is the CSR during the whole semester, but from different perspectives. What I want to emphasize in the last tutorial is that I encourage students to find the links between different perspectives to have a deeper understanding of this concept. And the second point I want to summarize here that for firms, they should consider how to balance expectations from different stakeholders. Especially from stakeholder perspective and a legal perspective, we can notice that for the firms, they have a wide range of stakeholders, and some stakeholders are more important than others. So one of the solutions to balance the expectations from different stakeholders is to prioritize them. So that is one of your tasks to try to the appropriate way to prioritize the stakeholders. Okay. The third point I want to summarize here is how to balance the firm's growth and stakeholders' expectation. We can notice that for the firms, of course, they have external expectations from stakeholders, but they still have internal demands for growth. So from the strategic perspective and behavioral perspective, we could think about whether incorporate stakeholders into strategy can help the firm to achieve competitive advantage or not, or whether they can achieve the win-win situation between the firm and the stakeholder expectation. The last point I want to emphasize that if the firm chooses CSR as one of strategy, it is a long-term investment. And of course, in the meantime, the CSR can provide long-term profit back to the company as well. However, if the firm decides to do so, just be patient, because when we discuss the Starbucks case, we mentioned that building good relationships takes time. So be patient if you choose the CSR as a strategy. Okay, so back to our learning outcomes and objectives, what I highlighted here is to develop ability to apply CSR concept to practice business strategy. So for our final coursework, we can notice that we are testing students' ability to use knowledge, but not the knowledge itself. Okay, so first of all, you need to identify appropriate knowledge you learn from the lecture and apply this knowledge to explain the business phenomenon. And also you should propose your original ideas to explain the phenomena and propose the future action. So that is what we wish you can achieve during learning the CSR during the whole semester. So overall, that is the revision for the tutorials this semester. If you still have any questions, I'm still here to answer any questions if, for the final coursework. So any students still have questions? In task one, most ones means several, yes. It means several stakeholders, but not necessarily equally important. You still can give the priority to the stakeholders you think they are important. Any more questions? No more question? Okay, so if no more questions here, okay, so then I just closed this session. And if you still have a question later on, okay, one more. How many value creation strategies should we analyze? Should we find out? You just try your best to find value creating strategies. There's no limits on how many strategies you should identify. At least you should provide some useful information for us to let us know whether you can identify it or not. Should our resource be academic? Or if you mean references, yes, you should follow academic reference format, for example, Harvard APA or something like that. But if you choose, for example, Harvard, just be consistent for your whole coursework.